Okay, hello, welcome to the Mystic Path. Welcome back. Welcome if you are new, welcome back. If you are a regular, good to see you again. This is going to be part 3 in our shadow work series, how to grow our soul through shadow work. We'll do a quick recap. In part 1 and part 2, we kind of talked about what is shadow work, how can it benefit. We kind of touched quickly on how can it benefit us in our lives. We're going to get more deeper into that in this part 3. We're going to get deep into, okay, full disclaimer, Watson just joined us. He's been sleeping while I've been filming, but he's awake now. So full disclaimer, the mystic cat, Watson, may be joining us. Right now, he's checking out. I had to move around some of his, he has this cat tunnel and this box of toys. I moved those around, so right now he's all worried about why I moved them. But just to let you know, he may jump up and want to participate because he likes to do that. And we love to have it. So, okay. So we're going to dive a little deeper in this episode about how doing shadow work will grow our soul and how it will make our life better. We kind of touched on it in part 2. In part 1 and part 2, we were just kind of explaining what is shadow work. And I was kind of getting deeper into it, and then I kind of just did a quick overview of how it can benefit us. Excuse me, my nose is itching like crazy because the spirits are here. Anyway, I also told a couple of stories in part 1 and 2 about my own issues and shadow and things that I continually have to work on, right? And so one of the things I wanted to say was, I told a story in part 2, I believe, about how I was just having this really pessimistic day, right? And I tried to do everything except accept my shadow, right? So, and once I then accepted and nurtured my shadow, then the issues dissipated, right? So I was kind of talking about how one day last month I just kind of woke up in this very pessimistic mood. Pessimism is a very big part of my shadow that I've had to work on for 20 years. And, even just when I think I have it licked, it will come back around to kind of test me or whatever. So I was kind of talking about how I was feeling just negative and everything was annoying me, and I had this tense energy going on, and I thought, I'm gonna run it out, right? I try to run, it doesn't go away. I'm gonna read because I'll just escape into a different reality and forget about it. And that, of course, didn't work. I couldn't focus on reading because it was just coming up, bubbling up to the surface to be dealt with. And so then I was I'm going to self-care my way out of it. I'm going to go take a long hot bath and lull it to sleep, right? And long story short, go back and watch episode 2 if you haven't. It wasn't until I just had this realization of oh, I'm just having a pessimistic day. This is part of my shadow. I just need to accept that this is part of who I am and nurture myself. I'm just having an off day. And the second I did that and had that realization, all the tension, all the pent up chaos that I was feeling in my energy, just dissipated. And so I was kind of laughing at myself because I was even after all these years of doing work, right? Because I've talked about on this channel, I've been in therapy for about 15 years. I started working on my shadow in my 20s, although it was I was not as committed to it as I am now. It was more I just dealt with problems when they caused an issue in my life, right? And as I got older, did more therapy and matured, I realized, you really have to, on a daily basis, do things to better yourself, to work on your shadow elements, to keep them from controlling you and making your life experience a struggle or full of suffering. So one of the things I wanted to bring up about that is, we talked about in episode 1 and 2 that, your shadow is never going to go away. You're never going to be at this point in your life where you're like, I have no bad qualities. I am so enlightened and I've done so much work that I am the perfect human and I have no cares in the world, no problems, and I'm not challenged by anything. That's just not realistic, okay? A lot of people have this misconception that healing and doing shadow work is full of love and light, and that's all it is. And if it's negative and dark, then I'm just gonna not deal with that. And that's just not realistic. We are dualistic beings sent to a school, which is Earth, in duality, good, bad, all of that, right? We covered that in episode 1 and 2. So no human ever is gonna be at a place where they're just like, yeah, I don't get bothered by my shadow, right? And so one of the things I wanted to kind of mention and talk about is that, because a lot of people then are gonna be like, well, if my shadow never goes away, then why should I even do any work on it, right? And I say that because, and I giggle because I was like that person, right? In my 20s, I kind of had this resistant, fuck you, excuse my language, F you attitude to the universe. And it was like, if everything didn't fall in line the way I wanted, I would resist any type of healing. And I kind of had this attitude of well, if I'm always going to be a pessimist, then I might as well just embrace it and dive into it, and that can cause its own problems. So I wanted to mention to you that, because a lot of people watching are going to feel like, well, if our shadow never goes away, then why even bother trying to do the work? And I'll explain to you why right now. Okay? Because as you do the work, your shadow will take up less of your time, right? So let's take that story I talked about in episode 2 that I just kind of recapped, where I was feeling very pessimistic. I was feeling all this energy. 20 years ago, when I had that kind of an episode, I would have sat in that pessimistic energy for weeks. 10 years ago, I would have sat in that energy for days. Now, 20 years of work, I just sit in that energy for a few hours, right? I woke up having a very pessimistic day. My energy felt very chaotic and just low vibration. And I did sit in it a little bit, but it only took me about 4 hours to get to the place where I was like, oh yeah, I'm just having a pessimistic day. This is just part of my shadow coming up to challenge me. And then once that happened, like I said, it dissipated. That's because it had no more power over me, right? It has no more power over me. It can't control me. It doesn't control my actions, my thoughts, my emotions, because now I have the tools, right? Because I've done 20 years of work. So now I know my shadow pretty intimately. And I know now that it can only wreak as much havoc in my life as I allow it, right? So, whereas 20 years ago, I didn't really realize that I was the one in control. I just thought, this is who I am, I'm a pessimistic person, and this is just who I am. And, that is not true to a degree, because we are who we choose to be. One of the major things I learned early on in therapy was nobody has the power to make you feel anything other than you. Nobody can make me come outside of myself and act a fool. Only I can make that choice. Now, Can I be triggered and then be emotionally out of control and run down a rabbit hole that I don't really feel like I'm consciously choosing? Yes. However, that's still your responsibility. If that happens to me, I still have to be accountable. That was me, right? Like, we can quickly, and I don't want to talk too much about this or get crazy in the comments with a discussion around this, but I mentioned in the first episode about Will Smith's autobiography, how it was really good, and it was a good kind of journey through his shadow work. And then after that video, he came outside himself and smacked Chris Rock at the Oscars. And then in episode 2, I talked about how that's a perfect example of no matter how much work we've done, no matter how happy we are, no matter how successful we are, no matter how high that pedestal is, the shadow will still come to test you. And if you're not prepared, it can make you act outside yourself, right? So he still has had to take accountability and responsibility for that action. Even though he was triggered and had an emotional response, he still did that. He may not have consciously chosen in the moment, like, oh, I'm going to go slap Chris Rock, right? Probably not. Probably what happened, and this is all just speculation based on how I know how it feels to be triggered. We all know how it feels to be triggered, right? And we've all done it. I've done it. Everyone's done it. If anybody says they haven't, they're not being authentic. Every human's done it. You get triggered. You act out, you lash out, you maybe say something, do something that's not really probably best for you or the people around you. And sometimes it happens so fast, it's not until after the fact that you think and you reflect and you think, oh, shoot, I was really just triggered and I blacked out for a second and I acted outside my character, right? It's happened to all of us. But you still did that, right? It wasn't a conscious choice, I'm gonna act outside my character, but your wounds overwhelmed you to the point that you lost control, right? So this is why we do shadow work, because the more you do the work, the more you can, here he comes. Watson's coming to join us. Come on, Bubba. So the more you do shadow work, the more you get to a place where you have enough tools in your toolbox that when you get triggered, you can take a step back and slide into observer mode, right? You can slide into observer mode and be like, wait a minute, what's happening? I'm being triggered right now. How am I going to react to this, right? So that's why we do the work. So I kind of wanted to bring that up, right? Like 20 years ago, when I would get triggered, I would react first, think second. 10 years ago, I would most of the time think first, react second, but occasionally I would still react first, think second. Now, 20 years after doing the work, I have so much practice that I'm much better at when I get triggered. I immediately, in my mind, stop what you're doing, take a step back, take a deep breath, assess what's happening here, and consciously choose on what I'm going to say, do, right? So I'm not just being triggered and reacting without thinking. So that's why we do shadow work. Like, I can see the progress in my life over 20 years. I have a much happier, calmer, harmonious life now because I have the tools for when something gets to me emotionally. I now know I have a toolbox of things I can do. And we're going to talk about in this series tools, right? So, you know, perfect example. When I was feeling all pessimistic, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I was using the tools in my toolbox, right? Running, exercise is a tool for me. Taking a bath, self-care, that's a tool for me. Reading, That's a hobby that I enjoy. That's a tool for me, right? So when I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm feeling like I can't really show up in the world today as who I want to be, I go to my toolbox. What in my toolbox is going to help make me feel better so that I can show up closer to that authentic self that I want to be, right? Because nobody wants to be reacting from their emotions, because when you look back and see sometime, like when I first started going to therapy, one of the things that struck me big was like I would build things up in my head, right? I would hold things in. I wouldn't tell anybody what I was feeling. I wouldn't tell anyone my needs. And then I would like create these scenarios in my head that like, well, they're not helping me because they don't like me. Or, you know, whatever. My mind would just go crazy. I'm sorry, there's like a light over here I was fixing because it was bothering me. See, that's a shadow the shadow aspect of myself. I have a little OCD. That's a shadow aspect. I have to constantly work on that. So anyway, long story short, you know, when I was first started going to therapy, I remember I would build, like whatever would happen in the week, I would like ruminate on it and build it up in my head. And I would have all these like, when I got to therapy, I was ready, right? I had all these things to like bitch about and complain about and to say this, and you know, this person did this to me because whatever. And the thing was, when I would say it out loud to an objective person, I would think, oh my God, that sounds so stupid, right? But in my head, it sounded perfectly logical, perfectly made sense. I had every right to be pissed off at this person, whatever it was. But then when I would say it out loud to somebody else and kind of see their reaction to what I was saying, I would realize like, oh, I'm overreacting right now. My shadow is taking over. My emotions are getting the best of me, and I'm not making the best decisions for myself and the people around me, right? So that's why we do shadow work. So I just kind of wanted to point that out, that doing shadow, the reason we do shadow work is you do get rewards. And in the long term, your life will change for the better. And you will be so much more prosperous, abundant. You will have better relationships with the people around you, right? So just keep that in mind. The more shadow work you do, the less time it takes up in your life. The less time your shadow takes up in your life. Okay? Let's move on. All right. We're going to just do a quick recap. You know, shadow work is a practice of healing and self-growth, right? It means it requires us to surrender and accept, which is going to be video 4. So stay tuned and keep watching, because in part 4, we're going to talk about surrender and acceptance and the roles that plays in shadow work, right? So again, shadow work is a practice of healing and self-growth, right? Continuing to do shadow work develops our self-awareness, and it ultimately gives us self-acceptance and gives us love and compassion for ourselves. Okay? Again, we talked about in episode 1 and 2, sometimes you need a therapist to help you through your shadow work. Sometimes you don't. If you have major childhood trauma or adult trauma from, from abuse, from, sexual violence and abuse, if you've been through something very horrific, you will probably need a therapist. It'll be very hard for you to do shadow work on your own. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I have talked about on this channel a lot, I'm a big fan of therapy. I think everybody should be in therapy. It would make the world a better place. We'd all get along a lot better. And we'd all be a lot happier. And that's the point, right? Isn't the point of life to to have happiness. The point isn't just to be here and be miserable, right? No, the point is to learn and grow and be happy. Find joy. So we will talk about here in a little bit kind of, how to start doing shadow work. And when you get to that place, you will have to decide what's best for you. If you need therapist, if you need, a lot of people just do a lot of self-help books, self-help programs. That also works. But again, like I said, if you've experienced some kind of serious trauma in your life, you need a professional, a trained professional. Listen to your doctors. I have talked a lot on this channel about how for years and years in my 20s and early 30s, I struggled with serious depression. Now I'm 46. I have had my depression under control for, about like 8-9 years now. And it occasionally, I will see signs that it's creeping back in, and then I do my shadow work. I do my work. I ask myself all the questions. I go back to therapy, right? I catch it early enough that it doesn't end up into a full-blown, like, depressive episode. So, and I can do that now because I've done so much work over the years, and because now I can recognize the signs. I know myself. I'm very self-aware of my own behaviors at this point. And I know the signs of when it's starting to creep in. And so now I have tools in my toolbox so I can keep that from happening. But one of the things early on when I first started therapy and dealing with my depression, it had gotten so bad that I needed medicine to help me over the hump to do the work, right? To take the edge off, to balance out my chemicals so that I could then go to therapy and face the things that I needed to face. And I wasn't on it forever, and I understand medicine's not for everybody. I am not saying one way or the other, do it, don't do it. I'm not giving that advice at all. I'm saying listen to the professionals, seek out professionals that know what they're doing, listen to your doctors, listen to your therapists, and also listen to your intuition. You will know I knew I needed it because I had tried on my own to figure out how to get out of the dark hole, and I couldn't. And so I had reached bottom. I was at a place where the only thing I could do was surrender, right? And ask others for help. And so I knew, my gut told me, you need to go see a doctor. You need to go see a therapist. And I did those things. And those things helped me get to the place that I could start doing the work and crawling out of the hole, right? And then after several years of consistently going to therapy, consistently taking my medicine, doing what we had all decided together that was best for me, then we all decided together that I didn't need to be on the medicine anymore, right? So then they weaned me off, and I continued therapy, continued doing other things, because now I was more balanced. I was more in a place where everything was back under control. And my lifestyle was better. I wasn't drinking as much. I was eating better, So I'm just saying, like, be open and be open-minded. Do not, listen to your gut, obviously. Follow your own intuition. But do not be afraid to ask for help. Like, we need to be willing to ask for help. Like, I can honestly say, if I had not had help, I probably would have ended up in a very dark place. Like, there were times I had serious, suicidal ideations. And if I had not asked for help, I might have ended up there. You know what I mean? So that's all I'm saying. Like, I knew in my gut that if I didn't do something different, if I didn't ask somebody to help me, I was not going to be here much longer, right? This was long ago in my 20s. So, so that's why, I just knew my soul was telling me, you can't do this by yourself. So I did what I had to do. So that's all I'm suggesting. Everybody's different. Not everybody, well, I think everybody needs therapy just because it teaches you about your emotions and it teaches you how to communicate healthily and things like that. But, I understand not everybody needs medicine. Not everybody needs like intensive trauma therapy, right? So that's what I'm saying. You have to do what's best for you. You have to ask for help and, then tailor a journey that's going to be best for you. Yes, because I was just touching on that. I have notes here. I just want to make sure, doing shadow work helps you embrace the part of yourself that's like suppressed or in shame. Because sometimes when we experience trauma as children, we don't have anyone there who's emotionally or mentally healthy to guide us. So a child's brain comes up with all kinds of things, right? And so you develop shame. That's like a natural human instinct, is that you develop shame. Then you start, the whole deal, negative self-talk, all of that. Doing shadow work helps you accept yourself. It helps you start to see how your thoughts and your emotions and your patterns of behavior influence your life. When you start to become aware of your patterns, and I'm talking family patterns, I'm talking personal patterns, when you start to get a handle on that stuff, it becomes very empowering, and you start to realize like I was saying, nobody can make me feel anything I'm not choosing to feel, because I'm so strong in myself now, and I'm so stable on a very stable foundation that I know, and my gut tells me like where the right path for me is. And that's because I've done so much shadow work. Hasn't always been this way, right? Like the shadow work and the growth is how I got here. So this is why we do those things, right? I have some notes here, so I want to make sure. Okay, doing shadow work also really can improve the relationships around us, right? Because then you can show up as your best self. You're not getting triggered by somebody else and then going off on them because you don't have a handle on yourself. Like, doing shadow work brings awareness to, the parts of our personality that we don't like so much, and it can help us grow and try to improve those parts of ourselves, right? Okay, so shadow work also, I talked about already, it makes us self-aware. It also helps us develop introspective skills so that we can go inside, we can reflect on our own behavior, we can grow personally, we can deal with our shame, our frustration, our fear. Those emotions can be very difficult to navigate alone. That's why I say, sometimes having somebody else help you, watching videos like this, reading a book of somebody else's perspective, going to a therapist and getting their objective opinion, right? Those things can help us grow, because these are heavy, heavy emotions that all humans have, and they are very difficult to navigate sometimes. And, we will start to develop self-compassion as well, because as we start to have to face these parts of ourselves we don't love, we realize that loving them is the key to healing them, right? Again, if you are struggling to practice shadow work on your own, ask for help. Go seek out help. And whatever your gut tells you help is, right? Whether it's therapy, whether it's medicine, whether it's watching videos like this on growing and healing, whether it's reading books, whether it's a little bit of all of it, getting an energy healer, all of those things. And there's not one right answer, right? Everybody has to figure out what works best for them. And for me, it's a combination of all of those things. I have utilized all of those things over the years to to help me do the shadow work. So also doing shadow work brings us a huge amount of clarity, right? It also builds resilience and mental fitness, right? Because like I was saying to you, now that I've done so many years of work, like I just did a full moon in Libra reading. Watch it if you're interested. But in there, they were talking about how, your solar plexus is going to be challenged during this full moon. And I told this story that a friend of mine had just taken this job about a month ago, and he called me the other day, and he's like, I quit my job. And I'm like, oh, you did? Why? And he's like, well, because I didn't really like it, and I didn't want to do it, and I felt pushed into it. And I immediately, and we're very good friends. We've been, he's one of my best friends since probably about 30 years almost now. So we can be very candid with each other, right? And so I said, oh, you're not doing your work. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, well, when you do your work, you cannot be pushed into anything by anyone. And he was like, you know what? You're right. You're right. He's like, I've been doing things that I don't really want to do. I'm doing them for other people. And I was like, you have to do your shadow work. You have to, there's a whole lot of other history there, but and he agreed. He was like, because I was like, that's one of the ways that you need to work on yourself and work on your shadow, is that you're being manipulated, or you're doing things that don't make you happy, that you don't want to do, and you're doing it to please the external, the people around you, or whatever, society. And we've all done it. I did it. I mean, a decade ago, well, actually 15 years ago, I married somebody, and my gut was telling me not to do it, and I didn't really want to ever get married, but I did it anyway because, society says, and everyone in my family was like, this is the best thing for you, la, la, la. And, and that is partially because I hadn't really gone deep down to do all the shadow work. And that is actually what prompted me to get into therapy and stuff, was I ended up in a place in my life where I was like, how did I even get here? I don't even want this. So that is also a very important thing that comes with doing shadow work, is you find clarity, you build a relationship with yourself, and you get a gut instinct, and your soul will talk to you, and you will immediately know. Like now, after years of all this shadow work, I immediately know. If somebody is like trying to push me to do something, I can immediately say to them, no thank you, that's not for me. I know that's not for me. That may work great for you, and that's for you, great. No thank you, it's not for me. Whereas 20 years ago, I probably just would have done it because it's easier, right? It's easier than having to speak my truth. It's easier because I don't want to make them mad. It's easier because society says this is what I'm supposed to do, right? You get it. You get the pattern there. So one of the best things I found in doing shadow work is I developed a very strong sense of self, a very strong relationship with my soul. And, it guides me. And I can't really be led by other people because I know what is for me and what is not for me. So clarity is a big one. Also, like I said, it takes up less time of your life. Okay, so we're just going to get more in depth over, again, I've kind of been covering them, why it's good to do shadow work. Clarity, you gain more confidence and self-esteem. You will show up more confidently in the world because you will be your authentic self, and you will feel confident in being that person no matter what anybody else says, because that's what's right for you, right? You won't have a bunch of self-doubt. You'll feel very confident in your choices. You won't have a lot of regrets because you understand that whatever just happened that you may or may not regret, there was a lesson there, and you learned something from it, and that made you who you are. So you don't really regret a lot of things because you can see the value in, like, oh, well, that experience wasn't great, but I learned this, and this, and now it's changed me and made me a better person. And so now I won't make that same mistake, right? So you don't have a ton of regrets. You're more confident. When you're more confident, it's a lot easier to achieve your goals. Your shadow, when you do the work, right, your shadow is not bugging you so much. It's not triggering you. It's not controlling your life. And so then it frees up all this time and energy for you to actually do the things that you want to do and live your dreams. You know, I do want to bring up that sometimes our shadow is actually valuable parts of our personality, right? Because when you bring those shadows into light, you learn from them and you may strengthen whatever it is, right? Like if you're a people pleaser and you start working on that, you people please less and less and less, like that's growth. And that shadow aspect was valuable because it taught you how to stand up for yourself. It taught you how to be self-empowered, right? Doing shadow work will improve your creativity. It will open up your psychic gifts, because every human has psychic gifts. It's just our trauma weighs us down so that we can't clearly hear the messages the universe and the energy is giving us. But when you do your shadow work and you clear that trauma, you start like your antenna is clear, right? Like the human brain is like an antenna, and you're like a radio station. You're just picking up the radio stations that the universe is sending messages through. And when you're full of trauma and you're deep in your shadow, that antenna is like clogged or down, right? And so you don't really pick up on those things. And you don't really connect to like Mother Nature and the universe and your soul through all of it, the collective. But when you do your shadow work, that all starts to clear out and you make better decisions because you're in touch with like the energy of the universe. It improves your creativity, builds better relationships with others. We already talked about that. It also makes you more compassionate to others, because when you've done your own shadow work, when you see someone else getting triggered and acting outside of themselves or acting in their shadow, you can recognize that. And then you will feel more compassion and love for them, because you'll think, oh my gosh, instead of fighting with them or having some kind of conflict, you'll understand that like this person is struggling right now with this issue, and fighting is only going to make it worse. Like you'll have love and compassion for them because you'll understand that like, I get it, shadow work is hard, right? It's hard for all of us. As a result, when you have those kinds of interactions with people, your bonds with the people around you become stronger, because now you guys aren't like combative. There's not a lot of negativity between you. You're exchanging those higher vibration emotions like compassion, love, understanding, right? So that goes for self as well. When you do your shadow work and you can start to see your shadow clearly and see that like, okay, this is a pattern I have because of this or whatever, because of this thing that happened in childhood or whatever it is, you start to become more accepting of yourself, because you start to understand that we're all just humans with our own things that we have, with our own challenges, and you start to have a lot more compassion for yourself. You start to have a lot more compassion for other people, because you realize that like, oh, we're all struggling. All right, what else? When you do shadow work, you will start to discover things in yourself you did not know were there, right? I talked briefly a second ago about how I ended up in a marriage that I kind of knew was not a good idea. I ignored my intuition. I did it anyway. And it was like a very long, dark 7 years, okay? And then like I said, I got to a very, very low place, very much at the bottom. and I discovered in myself strength and courage I did not even know I had, right? So doing shadow work made me discover qualities in myself that I didn't even know were there. And it prompted me to develop those qualities. And in doing that, right, then I became more confident. I became stronger. I had more courage in work, in my everyday life, right? So, doing shadow work really does allow you to be your best self. It allows you to be the best version of yourself. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. Doing shadow work will improve your overall wellness because repressing your shadow, being in the dark, can cause you to have problems you did not even know you had, right? And again, I'll go back to my story. So I was in this relationship for 7 years. It wasn't all bad, of course, but it consistently got worse and worse and worse. And there's, I could spend all day talking about it, but there's no reason because it's years in the past and I'm over it. I'm healed from it. But I do just want to point this out, right? Towards the end of it, when I was at the bottom, right? I told you I hit a bottom and it just got to this point where I was like, if I don't do something, I'm in trouble. And when I was at the bottom, I knew in my gut, I need a divorce. This relationship is not working. I am not happy, right? But it wasn't as easy as all that because I'd been with this person for, at that time, about 5 years. We owned property together. We had all of our friend groups were all meshed up, right? We had animals together. So it wasn't just as easy as me being like, I'm divorcing you and I'm leaving you, right? I had started a business during my marriage, so then that was complicating things. So it was just a lot. And so I knew in my gut I needed to leave the situation. I needed to move on. And I needed to get a divorce. But I also knew that was not going to be easy. And I also knew that my ex had some of his own shadow mental issues that he was not addressing. And so I knew telling him I wanted a divorce and executing getting a divorce was not going to be easy. He was not going to make it easy, and he did not make it easy. It actually got pretty abusive. And so when I initially had that first thought, I need to leave this relationship, I need a divorce, I knew it's going to be so difficult to untangle all of this. And so I just took that thought of I need a divorce and I just shoved it down for 2 years. I was just pretending like it's all going to be fine, right? And my gut kept telling me it's not going to be fine. You need to do something. And I guess I just didn't want to deal with it. I just knew he was not going to take the news well. He was not going to be cooperative. We owned a lot of property together. Our money was all tied up together. Our friends were all tied up together. We'd been together for 7+ years by the end. So I just was not looking forward to tackling it. And at the time, I didn't really have the strength. So that's when I went and sought out therapy. But I wanted to point this out because this is very important. I was talking about doing shadow work improves your overall wellness. What ended up happening was the more and more I repressed that thought about getting a divorce, and it's just going to be too difficult, so I'll just, I don't know what I thought. I had actually convinced myself, I'll just spend the rest of my life miserable and nobody will know because I'll just pretend that I'm happy, right? And that in itself shows you what in a dark depression I was, because that's not even Like, who would do that? Who would spend their whole life miserable just because it was easier? What? That doesn't even make any sense, right? So what ended up happening was my body, I started getting physically ill. I started having female problems, bad female problems for 2 years. And nobody could explain what was going on. I went to specialists. I went to all kinds of doctors. I had exploratory surgery at one point because nobody could figure out. I was having all these symptoms, and I don't want to get too gross, but I was having like monthly PMS all day, every day for 2 years. Okay? And that was piled on top of all of the emotional stuff I was dealing with, right? Which was, I was very unhappy. I felt stuck in a marriage that I did not want to be in. I felt trapped financially because I was worried that divorcing him, he would take half of my business, right? There was just so many. I was worried I was going to have to give up my pets. So many things all at one time. And my body, it was manifesting in my body because I was not addressing it. I was ignoring all of the things that I needed to do, all of the red flags, all of the stuff that my soul was telling me I needed to do to survive and live through the situation, because I just didn't want to face it, right? And so for 2 years, I was having all these horrible things happen to my body. And I felt awful physically. Of course, I felt awful mentally and emotionally. That was all just one big chaotic situation, right? On top of that, I'm dealing with somebody else who had their own issues they weren't addressing. It was not a great time. And one of the times, so I had to have exploratory surgery. Still, nobody could explain it. Like I said, I was going to all these specialists. I was going to all these doctors. I was constantly getting poked and prodded. And they sent me at one point, they had these like learning students in, and everyone was trying to figure out what the problem could be because I was manifesting all these physical symptoms in my female area, right? In my sacral chakra. Makes perfect sense. And the exploratory surgery, they found nothing. So then they were like, well, let's give you a colonoscopy just to ensure that maybe there's not like colon cancer or something, right? And so, and that in itself is not a fun process because you have to drink all that stuff, right? I'm not going to get into it, but it's like you do all this prep for a couple days, which is horrible. You spend a lot of time on the toilet, then you go get the colonoscopy. So the day of the colonoscopy, we're running late because my ex-husband was being difficult. And so then he's like speeding us there, and we almost had a car accident. And then we end up in a big argument because he's speeding and we almost had a car accident, whatever. We get to the hospital. I have this colonoscopy. They drug me up, right? I have this colonoscopy. I wake up. I'm still like all drugged up from anesthesia. And I don't know if it was the anesthesia. I don't know if it was just I had reached my breaking point, but it was like all of a sudden I had all this clarity and I was like, I cannot wait one more day. And so they get me out of recovery. My husband at the time, drives me home. The second we get home, I said to him, I want a divorce. Of course, I'm not going to bore you with what ended up happening, but he, just like I said, he did not take it easy. It was a mess. However, over the next week, all of the problems physically I'd been having in my body for 2 years just went away. And even to this day, I still go to my gynecologist, and she is like, my God, you have not had another female problem in 10 years. That is just amazing. And I believe that was my body. I was ignoring and repressing my shadow and addressing the things in my life that were keeping me that stuck and stagnant and unhappy. And it was physically manifesting in my body. So the universe was going to make me as miserable as I needed to be until I was going to get the courage and the strength to move and make changes in my life, right? And it has now been almost 11 years since my divorce. Actually 11 years in May. So very close. And I have never again had another female issue that I had for 2 years that nobody could figure out what was happening. So that just goes to show you that when you repress your shadow and you don't deal with the things you need to deal with, the universe will do what it has to do to make you move and change. And my body was shutting down on me because I was not facing what I needed to face. And then the second I faced it and said out loud, I need a divorce, and I got a divorce lawyer like the next day, and I started the process, within a week, all of those problems that I had had for the last 2 years went away. So again, shadow work will improve your physical wellness. It will improve your physical wellness, your mental wellness, your emotional wellness. All very important things. We'll keep going. Increase your compassion towards others. We already talked about that. Have better clarity. We already talked about that, right? So now let's talk about how to start shadow work. Okay. Step 1, decide if you need extra help. Decide if you can do the shadow work on your own or if you need help, okay? In my story I just told, I reached such a bottom. Everything in my life on every front was falling apart, and including my physical health. And I was in such a dark place, I wasn't sure I could get out of it on my own. So I decided right then, I need therapy. And I got therapy. And going to therapy, like I got therapy at year 5, and then by year 7, that's why I had the courage to be like, I'm out, I'm done, I need a divorce, right? Because I started doing the work in therapy, I started dealing with the hard issues, I started facing the fact that I had made a bunch of choices that I didn't really want to make. I was not making them for myself. I was making them for other people. And I had to take accountability and responsibility for the fact that I was in a place in my life that I was unhappy with. But I put myself there. I made choices that got me there, right? So 1, decide if you need to seek therapy, if you need to seek professional help, or if you can start to do it on your own. 2, you need to start practicing spotting your inner shadow, right? Everyone knows what it feels like to get triggered, right? And you might not always know in the moment what it feels like to be triggered, but usually upon reflection, you realize, oh, I was triggered. I didn't react the best way. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that, right? So once you start reflecting, you can get better at feeling, oh, I know what this feeling is. I'm being triggered, right? And that takes practice. Like I said, I still have moments where I have to deal with things I thought I already dealt with and let go and released, right? But they come back and I still have to deal with it. And then and it takes practice to, get to a place where you're not triggered by people, to get to a place where, like I said, now I can spot the signs of my depression, right? That took practice, okay? 3, start evaluating your childhood. Sometimes our shadow aspects come from learned behavior, modeled behavior. That's called generational trauma, right? Like pessimism is a generational trauma in my family. My grandparents were pessimistic, my parents were pessimistic, and then I became pessimistic, right? I'm even seeing it happen in my niece now. So that's like 4 generations of the same shadow aspect. So sometimes our childhood teaches us things, teaches us dysfunction. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just that your parents might not have the tools either. If no one ever taught them the tools to deal with their emotions, then they don't have the knowledge to teach you, right? So then we pass that stuff down. That's generational trauma. So sometimes trauma is created in childhood. Sometimes trauma is created by a sudden accident or, like an incident that happens and it affects you in a negative way. So you're going to have to think back throughout your life and start to identify maybe, why do I do these things? Why do I have this behavior? Where did this behavior come from? Where did I learn it from? Number 4, avoid shaming yourself. Okay? Avoid shaming yourself. Avoid being ashamed of who you are or your shadow. Like, we all have personality traits we don't love about ourselves. That's our shadow. Everybody has it. You should not be ashamed of it. You should not beat yourself up. That will just keep you stuck. Okay? 5, meditate to observe your triggers. So like what I was just saying, when you get triggered, we all know what that feels like. We can later on then meditate and ask our inner soul, why did I get triggered by that? Like, there's a saying, some people will never like you because your spirit irritates their demons. Okay? I like that saying, because basically what that means is like, there's something about you that's triggering their shadow. So then they decide, well, I don't like you because I just don't like you. But usually when we don't like somebody or when we get really triggered by somebody, it's because they're displaying something that we have within ourselves that we don't love, right? So sometimes you need to meditate to figure out, like, why am I being triggered? Why does this person trigger me? What about this person triggers me? Or what about this situation triggers me? Why does it make me feel this way? And again, you may have to go back and think, in childhood, does anything happening here remind me of what happened in my childhood? Keep a journal, okay? Number 6, keep a journal. I found a lot of help. I have a lot of friends who found a lot of help in journaling when you get triggered, or when you, like, because I get it. Sometimes, like, you're at work, you get triggered. You can't stop what you're doing at work and be like, well, I was just triggered. I got to go meditate and deal with myself. Okay? That's not realistic. Just like the thing with Will Smith. He slapped Chris Rock. He might not have even processed everything yet. So it's not like he went back to his seat and was like, oh, I just got triggered. I need to figure out what's happening here, right? No, because he was at the Oscars and there were a lot of people and it was live TV and the show kept going. So sometimes we have to go in a couple days, or when we have time, when we've processed it, we need to sit down and meditate and ask ourselves these hard questions. We're going to talk about these questions here in a minute. But that's when a journal can help, because sometimes, like, I'll just ask myself a question and just start writing, and without really thinking too much, then when I go back and read what I've written, it explains. I'm like, oh, that's why I got triggered, or oh, that reminds me of this and that's why it's happening, right? So a journal is very helpful. It doesn't have to be written word. You can paint your journal, right? You can scrapbook your journal, whatever works for you. Which leads me to express your shadow artistically, right? Sometimes the best way to deal with our emotions is to paint or draw or collage or whatever it is, right? Some kind of hobby, knitting, whatever it is. And then number 8, start the inner dialogue. Start asking yourself the difficult questions. Start playing investigator into your life to figure out, like, why do I behave this way? Where did this come from? Why does this trigger me, right? So we're gonna talk about how to kind of organize yourself to do shadow work now, and then we're gonna wrap it up, because I've been talking for a while, and I don't want these videos to be so long that they're annoying. And I know we all don't have hours and hours sometimes to sit down. So we're gonna wrap this one up, and then part 4 I'll work on sometime next week, which will be part 4, surrendering and acceptance. Okay? So, how do you do the shadow work, right? When you're triggered, when you're bothered by something, when you're acting outside of yourself, right? We just talked about how you need to start like practicing spotting your shadow. So when you start to spot your shadow, what do you do then, right? This is where your journal may be helpful, or even painting or collaging it. We got 4 steps here that will kind of help you get in touch with yourself to start to deal with whatever the issue is, okay? First, name the current issue, okay? So when you're being triggered, or you're acting outside of yourself, or you're reflecting on an instance where you were triggered and acting outside of yourself, you're gonna ask yourself, what's the issue here? Am I mad? Am I sad? Am I angry? Am I frustrated? Am I, right? Okay, name the issue. 2. Name the issue could also be like, I just had a fight with my sister, right? I just lost my job. I just told my boss to F off, right? Here's a perfect example. Yesterday, I was on the phone with my niece. She's 12, she's at that age, right? And that can be a little annoying, especially when you're trying to talk. I was on FaceTime with my mom. We were trying to talk about something. My niece just kept, and I had a moment where I acted outside myself, and I was like, man, you are being annoying, which is really not the best way to handle it, right? And that's not really what you should say to a kid, because then that's going to create an issue for them that may cause them to then get a little trauma. My aunt thinks I'm annoying, right? So that would be name the current issue. I called my niece annoying. Okay? 2, figure out what is the core emotion underneath the issue. Well, when I asked myself that question, the core issue is frustration, or the core emotion was frustration. I was trying to have a conversation with my mom. My niece kept interrupting. She wasn't being respectful of us and our conversation. She was trying to put all the attention on herself. That made me frustrated, right? So I was frustrated, so then I lashed out, right? So 3, connect to the core emotion and see if you can connect it to a past event or a belief you have, right? So I would then ask myself, why, did I call her annoying? Did I get frustrated by this because of maybe something that happened to me like that was similar? You get what I'm saying, right? So then 4, decide the new direction while being gentle with yourself, right? So then for me, I realized I shouldn't have said that. I acted out of frustration. So I decided on a new direction, which was I needed to call her and apologize and be like, look, I'm sorry I called you annoying. I did not mean that you're annoying. I was just very frustrated that you were kept interrupting your grandmother and I, and we weren't able to have a conversation, right? And I also had a belief that I was taught that kids should be respectful of adults and not interrupt, right? So I connected my frustration to a belief that I was taught that children should sit down and be quiet and be respectful of the grown-ups, right? So that's how I worked through that issue. That's a very small example, but these are just 4 steps that will help you get started when you're dealing with your shadow. I hope this video has been helpful. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Really do please comment, because it really does help me to know if you guys find value in these videos, if they're helping anybody. I want to wish you all a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, weekend, whatever it is for you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for watching. And I wish you luck on your shadow work. I will see you in part 4. Namaste.